Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson. Presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is, what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building. It's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
If you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
and you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BS and no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record button?
I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Could we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? Corey, how we doing?
Well, I was trying to remember, but I think this might be the first time we've ever recorded a podcast on a Friday afternoon. So I'm just hoping that both you and I can stay awake and alert here.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much good stuff going on that I'm just all abuzz. I don't know that I could fall asleep. I might not get any sleep tonight with all the stuff buzzing around the world these days.
Man, no kidding.
But you just got back from, you said you were teaching archery to fourth graders today?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
man.
fourth graders in this great state of Idaho learn Idaho history.
Uh-huh.
And evidently, as part of Idaho history, they learned about archery. And so we got to take them out and shoot some targets and show them how a recurve and a longbow work. And yeah.
Man, see, you are so full of good deeds. I can't believe you hang out with a guy like me.
Well, it's similar to what you go through, but my wife works there at the elementary school, and I was voluntold that they needed help on on archery day. So no, I love things like that. In fact, we've got a class at the high school here locally that is the University of Elk Hunting course. And so they've got a high school teacher that's an archery elk hunter, and the principal approached me and said, hey, would we be able to use the University of Elk Hunting as a curriculum for a class at school? And I think we're on the 4th or 5th year of it now. And there's like 23 kids. They only open it for seniors because of the demand, and they want to make sure that they're interested and mature and taking it for the right reasons. But yeah, there's 23 seniors in the University of Elk Hunting class at the high school here. So I get to go in and help teach the actual elk calling portion of it.
Man, if you believe in karma, Corey Jacobson's going to draw every tag he put in for this year.
Well, I've got subject matter on that as well.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wait a second. You logged in, you said Forrest Gump.
Yeah. Well, we were talking you said you got mixed up in a protest in Washington, D.C., and you felt like Forrest Gump when he was in the protest in the movie. So it just...
Yeah.
It asked for my name, and
it only says Corey Jacobson on the screen when you and I are doing this, and today it says Forrest Gump.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, where do we start? I mean, we can talk about me being ready to draw every tag I put in for this year. We can talk about your time in Washington, D.C. We could skip all that and just talk about elk hunting. We've got Utah and then Nevada and Oregon coming up. Yeah. All sorts of stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to let you be the gauge of how much Washington, D.C. stuff we talk about, because I just got back from a week walking around Capitol Hill and doing all that stuff. And I feel that for every day I'm on Capitol Hill, when I land back in Bozeman, Montana, I got to shower at least once immediately. So if I'm there for 5 days, I need to take 5 consecutive showers just to get cleaned off.
The American public might suggest doubling that frequency, but
they might. It was an interesting week to be in Washington, D.C., I'll tell you that.
Yeah, because that was the week of the tariffs and everything, right?
Yeah. And so trying to, you schedule all these meetings and you spend months prepping and making sure you got a meeting with these staffers and this congressperson, this senator, this, whoever, has some influence on public land and conservation issues. And then you get back there and all of the oxygen got sucked out of the room by tariffs. It's like, Randy, we know why you're here. We're on board with you. Don't worry about it. We got to vote on tariffs here. I got to leave.
Yep.
Like, oh, man. But it was still worthwhile. You go there, you really get an understanding of how much of our issues, well, first of all, you get a gauge for where our issues are on the priority list. Relationships you've built over 20 years of communicating with staffers, because the one thing that doesn't turn over as much are the staffers. And so the staffs, whether it's a committee staff or a staff of that elected official, sometimes they're your best source of information. And so those relationships are invaluable, and you go there and they'll give you the real skinny about where things are in the priority list and what's being discussed. And I wish I could tell you that funding of conservation and funding of public access was high on that priority list when I was back there. But it's going to take an awful lot to move our items up that priority list. So, but I never give up. And there were other people back there doing the same thing I was. It was kind of a coordinated effort. We thought, the first week of April, that's kind of a cleaner slate. They got all their arguing done. They just come back. They seat the new Congress in January. And by the time they fight over who the leaders of each party are and what the committee assignments are going to be, by 1st of March, they kind of got that out of their system. And well, it wasn't a clean week to be back there, but got to meet with a lot of people though. This would surprise you, Corey. The number of people I ran into who, whether they're on some staff or some committee staff, who listen to the Elk Talk podcast
in Washington, D.C.
In Washington, D.C.
Wow.
It's very interesting.
Well,
so
shout out to them.
Yeah. I wish I could remember their names, but you're walking down a hallway or whatever, and someone's like, "Aren't you Randy Newberg?" Because you got to dress up when you're there. I can't wear a ball cap or whatever. And so I'm sure they're like, "That Newberg?" And so they'd stop you. "Hey, I love the Elk Talk podcast. Keep it up." And you're passing through the hallway like, "Oh, well, thank you." You don't get a name of whoever it is. But a couple of them specifically bring up things that we talk about on here.
If they can mention something we've talked about, they listened, because nobody's going to guess. Nobody's going to guess the topics we come up with.
No. So anyhow, that's interesting. It really helped me solidify where I think a lot of this stuff is headed, where opportunities might exist, because whenever there's a lot of change and disruption, I'm a firm believer, and my life experiences have supported this. Just because there's change and disruption doesn't mean there is never opportunity. So
for sure,
I don't know where those opportunities will be for the hunting and public land space, but I'm keeping my eyes open.
Well, it's frustrating. I mean, it's really easy to become discouraged, with all the change and disruption, because, we expect things to go one way, and when they don't, it almost feels like it's out of our control. But like you said, there's always an opportunity to seek a solution. And I think that's, even if one door closes, we've got to keep looking, because if it's something we're passionate about, something we believe in, then it's worth fighting for.
Yeah. If there's one thing that I think a message I got from a few people that was helpful to confirm it is, hey, Randy, you being back here, you coming back here as often as you do, that's way more valuable than screaming and yelling, because you come back here. And I know that part of that comes from just years and years of working at it, and not everybody can do that. But point of that is, if anyone's listening and says, hey, I want to engage with my elected official, whether it's a congressperson, a senator, U.S. senator, or even at your state level, engaging with them, I always use it the 3 Ps: polite, professional, and persistent. It was good to have that reinforcement that the way that you conduct yourself, the way that you are more about the information in the issue, and you don't get all tied up on the person or the party or whatever. That's always good feedback to get that of, hey, the reason you're in this meeting is because of the way that you conduct your platforms and the investments you've made in relationships. And so if anyone is going down that path, that would be kind of my advice is, relationships don't happen overnight. Relationships can be destroyed real quickly, but it takes a long time to build those relationships. So, how we conduct ourselves,
when you go on social media, you see so much emotion, and everybody's communicating with that emotion rather than, I had a basketball player that phenomenal athlete, but he was so emotional, he would take himself out of the game, like just mentally. And I said, if you can channel that emotion, play with emotion, but don't be emotional. And I think it's the same in things like this, that have emotion, be passionate about something, but don't communicate through emotion. Like, you can't call names. You can't be negative. It's got to be, hey, I'm passionate about this. This is why I believe in it. This is what supports my passion. Here's my thoughts, and I want to understand why you think this way, and let's have a conversation. And these people can be swayed. I mean, there is no doubt that when they see, like you said, enough persistence and enough volume coming through, they can be persuaded. Unfortunately, if we don't get involved, they can be persuaded from the other side just as easily.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you make a really good point there, Corey, that passion is the greatest thing we can have. That's what we all have that drives us when it's hunting. You teaching 4th graders, it's your passion for the hunt and for the future of hunting. But when you let passion become emotion and emotional outbursts, you lose people.
Yeah.
And so that was a good lesson, or not lesson, because I've always operated that way, but good confirmation, especially in a time like this when, like you mentioned, so many people just want to do an Instagram post or get on Facebook and rant and rave. Might make you feel better, but when you're a smaller portion of society, we have to be strategic in how we do things. We don't have the benefit of, hey, we're 80% of the American public. You better shape up or we're going to ship you out. We don't have that benefit. So we got to really be strategic in what we do and how we do things. And,
social media, people, when they get emotional there, they get some support. There's going to be people that comment and be like, you're right. You're absolutely right. And that justifies them using that. But they haven't persuaded they haven't changed anybody's mind. Those are people that already felt the exact same way, that are chiming in to get their feelings across as well. When you come across, and there's always going to be some. We talked about bonus points in the last one, and I shared statistics, like actual statistics. You can manipulate them any way you want to, but at the end of the day, the number is the number. It's a law. Like statistics are a law. And we had a couple people that emailed and said, your numbers were wrong. Your numbers are off. One of them used Utah as an example and said he could draw a quality tag as a resident in Utah every 4 or 5 years. And I'm like, all right, if anybody needs called out on something here, that's it, because my numbers were just the numbers. I'm using them to support my stance for sure, but they aren't manipulated. And I think that, on social media, sometimes we get into that where we think we are changing everybody's mind through our emotional comment, when in reality, we aren't changing anybody's mind. We're just finding out who supports us. And when you're on social media and you get 10 comments supporting you, you feel pretty proud and pretty good. But in reality, that's it's not always the best way to go about getting your point across or affecting change.
Yeah. And so I purposely seek out the hunters on Capitol Hill. I have a pretty short list of who on the House side and who on the Senate side hunt. And it's not a very long list. Pete Vanderplot's in my hometown of Big Falls, Minnesota. He is a head sawyer. He was missing 3 fingers on one hand. And even with his 7 remaining digits, I don't think I'd use them all to count the hunters in Congress, or at least the big game hunters.
Yeah.
So in that process, I made sure that I went and met and got on the calendar of 2 people I know who are really passionate hunters. One on each side.
I was just going to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that they're on both sides of the political aisle.
Yeah. One, Senator Daines from Montana, the Republican, just passionate about hunting. It's part of his family legacy. That's what they do. He's got pictures all over his office about his hunting. And then on the other side, a Democrat is Senator Heinrich from New Mexico. He is all into hunting. Elk hunting is his thing. He wishes he could move the Senate August recess to September. He said, then I could be elk hunting all the time. I'm like, well, let me know what I need to do to help with that. I think we need a national referendum on moving the Senate recess or the congressional recess from August to September. So my point of that is, when I'm going there to talk about public land elk hunting issues, having somebody on each side is super, super helpful.
Yeah.
And they can tell me what's going on, what they see on their side. And sometimes they'll tell me what they can see going on the other side. And their staffers are really, really helpful because they know their boss has a priority on hunting and public lands. And so I wish that instead of just the 2 of them in the Senate, I could tell you there's 12 of them. I'm still looking for those other 10. But I know it's not for everybody. A lot of people are like, I don't do politics. And I don't either. I do policy is what I do. Advocacy and policy is what I'm in my head, what I'm there for. And that means you don't worry about the person, really. You worry about their positions.
Yep.
And I might be 100% on board with them on, guns, but maybe I'm not on board with them when they have a different position on public lands than I have. But you got to try to work with what the realities of the landscape are. And some of the feedback I got is, you as hunters and you as public land advocates need to work on your strategy and be more strategic, because 1, your issues are moving down the priority list, and 2, you're a very small portion of the electorate.
Yeah,
you got to be thinking about it. So. Yeah, that's and then I told you I felt like Forrest Gump because I walked out of the Library of Congress on Saturday. There was one heck of a big parade. I thought it was a parade. Come to find out it was a protest. And so Kim and I come out of the Library of Congress. She's like, well, we could use the exercise. Let's just walk down to the Smithsonian. It's like 2 miles. Well, everyone's going that way. I'm like, well, well, I'm the only one without a sign. I'm like, what's going on here? I look around. I'm like, that's this guy walking beside me. I mean, boy, he's in a hurry. He's like really strutting, like, when you're going to do some serious business, you kind of got a gait that is pretty powerful. And I'm like, hey, what's going on here? And he just looked at me like, what the hell are you doing here if you don't know what's going on? And he's like, it's the hands-off march. I'm like, what's that? What do you mean, what's that? I mean, I'm like, I can tell he doesn't want to be annoyed by some ignorant guy who just fell off the pumpkin wagon out in Montana. And some lady's like, well, it's the hands-off march today. We're all heading down to the National Mall. Well, I looked up ahead of me, and for a mile, it was a mosh pit of people carrying signs. I looked at Kim, my wife, she's like as quiet as a church mouse. I'm like, honey, is it worth it to go to the Smithsonian? She's like, I don't want to be caught in this. I don't know what's going on here. We hung a hard right.
We need to do a Freedom of Information Act request and get video of this and find Randy and the mob there. We could make all sorts of memes with that.
But we hung a hard right, and we went to this restaurant called Succotash. It's funny, when we walked in there and asked for a table, everybody we saw looked like they were similar refugees from the parade. Like, man, we got out of there. But it was kind of funny. There were some people that had signs, hands off public land, hands off conservation funding. I did see a few of those. So I thought maybe I'm in the right spot. And then I saw some that, hands off all kinds of other stuff. I'm like, I don't know if this is my folk. Once we got out of there, Kim started laughing so hard. She's like, can you imagine if someone came up, because there were a lot of media there, came up and started interviewing you, and all your followers saw you marching down to the National Mall in a parade?
We knew Randy was going to Washington last week. We didn't realize what his agenda was, I guess.
Yeah, and so we got a good laugh out of it, because I'd forgot about that Forrest Gump segment where he got caught up in the war protest and didn't know he's in a war protest. And Kim was like, sometimes your simple mind is just like the Forrest Gump character. Like, oh, thanks, honey. Want a box of chocolates? We might have some people listening, Corey, who are so young they haven't watched the movie Forrest Gump. I don't know.
I think I don't know. I mean, I try to gauge that as well. And it's amazing, like the music my kids listen to. They listen to 90s country, and they know, songs that I listened to when I was their age. They watch a lot of those movies that were popular when we were younger. And so, I think parents are doing a pretty good job of sharing some of those important things from our youth with our kids.
Yeah. Wow. Another bad note of last week is Val Kilmer died.
Yeah.
I don't, the Randy Newberg household flag is flying at half mast, man. His character in Tombstone, Doc Holliday, is the best piece of acting I've ever seen. Not that has anything to do with elk hunting, but if you watch our content and you haven't seen the movie Tombstone, you probably don't get half of my inside jokes or outside jokes. So, anyhow, are we going to talk about anything elk hunting? All right, we're already 20 minutes into this, Corey, and we haven't, other than talking about you teaching archery, all we've talked about is public lands. And
I think that relates pretty tightly to elk hunting, but we can
all right.
Definitely. There was we talked about me applying for Montana as a non-resident and the debacle of being caught in the middle with 1 point and how that diminishes your chances of drawing to basically zero. You have a better chance of drawing with 0 points than with 1. several
Yeah.
people reached out and had a lot of ideas. Some of them were too late because I'd already applied, but they said if you
Yeah.
have 1 point and you apply with somebody with 0 points, does that move you down into the 0 point pool to make your odds better? There were a couple of good suggestions there, but what I didn't realize was if you have 1 point from last year's application and you apply this year, you can select, I want a point. And when you select that point goes onto this year's application. And I did that. So I would jump back in and check my account, and it shows my application for the general elk license in Montana as going in with 2 points. So
Okay. See, I thought that only applied to bonus points, not the preference points that you guys get to use.
Yeah, because I have 10 or 11 bonus points in Montana, but I have 2 preference points on this year's application. So,
well, that means you have a 90% chance of drawing, Corey.
Yep. So I went from pretty much 0% to 90%. So,
wow,
positive news there. And then I looked in Wyoming, and I was mistaken in Wyoming, and we've got probably 1.5 points extra needed to draw the general tag there. So I should draw Wyoming and Montana general tags.
Let me know if you need a camp cook or anything. I'll bring my string of llamas and have beans and weenies every night.
My goodness, that's you're speaking my language now. With the llamas, not the beans. Yeah, with the llamas. We would bring something other than beanie weenies to eat for dinner, but.
Well, see, I don't apply as a non-resident in Montana, so I just go by that tag over the counter.
Yep.
I did not know that I know on the bonus point side, because us residents are subject to bonus points. I knew that if I bought a bonus point this year, it got added for my limited entry odds.
Yep.
I did not know that applied to the preference points in the non-resident big game draw. So
yeah, I didn't realize it either, and so somebody had emailed it and said, "Hey, I think this is how it works." And so I was jumping into the website to see if I could find any information, and just happened to click on my application to review it, and it said applied with 2 preference points. So,
oh, if you had between 2.2 and 3. So all the way down to 2.2 preference points last year was 100% draw odds. Anyone between 2 and 2.2, it was 90% draw odds. So,
I'll take 90%.
Yeah. All this good karma you're spreading around to the world, you're going to draw. So
if I don't, I'll come up with some kind of an excuse and someone to blame.
Right. There you go. Yeah. But we got Utah coming up. April 24th, I believe it is. I should know that for sure.
You should.
I'll just say April 20th. I know that's way before.
Well,
so if I tell them the deadline's April 20th, they shouldn't miss a deadline on the 24th.
They shouldn't,
but
we'll verify here, because if we are going to be the givers of information, we better make sure our information is correct.
All right.
So I'm looking real quick here. So April 24th, 2025 at 11 p.m. Mountain Time. This deadline applies to applications for any bull elk permits and other limited entry big game permits.
Well, I guess now they know. If I've fouled that up, I guess they can blame me.
No, they can't blame you now. We've distributed the right information.
April 24th, 2025. Yeah. All right. We're such downers on Utah. I don't know if anyone in the audience even applies in Utah.
I don't either, but what
we tried.
Did they pass the increase for non-resident fees?
Yes.
That passed. Yep. Does that take effect? When does that take effect?
They're going to increase the license fee, I think, effective July 1st, which if you applied in the draw, you already needed to have a license. So for all practical purposes, none of the increases take place until next year. They sent out an email to a lot of us. I don't know how you get on their email. I think I checked the box that says keep me notified. so I'm on their email list, saying, "Hey, we even though we were given authority to raise the prices, we didn't raise them all the way."
Aren't we good guys?
Yeah, they get any kinder, they'll die of enlargement of the heart or something. But, so they did. The prices are going up, and I suspect they'll probably each year bump that up some to get to where that cap now is for non-resident. So, yeah. So know what I did? This might be stupid. I went and bought 4 years worth, because when you go to Utah and log in, you can buy up to 5 years, I think, of licenses at one time, and they give you $1 off for each year. But if I can lock in that $120 price today versus the $250 it could become next year or the year after, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get a 30, 40, 50% discount.
Wow.
So I bought
that's
4
like
years
an
worth of
investment.
licenses.
I mean, that's
the tightwad accountant doing all of his math.
You have to be careful giving that kind of financial advice on a podcast and not being registered or certified or whatever you have to be. That's somebody could take that and use that as an investment strategy.
Yeah, well, I give a lot of marriage advice, and I'm not certified for that either. So
your wife can attest to that certification.
I guess if we're gonna get litigated and sued, well, may as well not have any disclaimers on anything. But no, that's what I did, and I don't know. Maybe I might not live long enough to use all 4 of those licenses. But
yeah.
Oh well, that's what I did, because I saw that. Okay, I think it's going from 120 to 150 next year. So right there, I'm buying next year's license at a 20% discount.
Yep.
I can't earn the way the market's going the last week. I can't earn 20% on my money now.
Depends on which day you get in, but yeah.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's not that. People are going to wonder how tariffs affect elk hunting. Well, how it affects elk hunting is that we can't get any good policy passed when they're talking about tariffs back there. That's how tariffs talk about good elk hunting. I thought we had like this 2-year window to get some better forestry management stuff and a few other things. Everyone's so distracted. I don't think we got a chance on that. But hope I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, steering the ship back in a good direction here and getting away from policy and politics and talking about deadlines and elk hunting. So Utah's the 24th, and like Randy said, we've dished on Utah enough that if you are still putting in as a non-resident there, you probably know the game and know why it's difficult to draw. But that's the deadline. What else is coming up? We got Nevada on, is it May 7th?
May 7th or 8th? Which one is it this year? I'm looking at my calendar. May 7th. Yeah, May 7th. Oregon, May 15th.
And then Idaho, June 5th. So those are obviously a ways out, but those are kind of the last of them to apply.
Yep. After the Idaho draw on June 5th, if you don't have an application in, you're going to be left with an empty sack. You have a long face come hunting season.
Unless you want to go to Colorado for 2nd and 3rd season rifle, it's still over the counter. Is that right?
That's correct.
That's
archery's not over the counter.
Yeah, that's about the only thing.
Archery's still over the counter for residents, but not for non-residents. So, but yeah, I'm all on board with continuing to send Utah my money. Utah is one of the last states I could justify financially adding to my budget. So I have fewer points in Utah than I do most of the other states that got me roped into their Ponzi scheme earlier. But oh well, that just is what it is. Now I'm at the age where I think of the stupid stuff I spend money on. I may as well send some money to Utah, even though it's like a really expensive raffle ticket with really bad odds. But
Yeah.
never know.
I drew my elk tag there in 2011, 2012, something like that. And I don't know if it's still the same. At the time, there was a wait, I think a 5-year wait after you draw a tag before you could start applying again. And by the time that expired, I was looking at draw odds and the number of tags being issued. And I thought, it doesn't make sense anymore. So I haven't bought a license in Utah since I drew that elk tag. And that's been a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I would tell people, if you've applied in Wyoming, you have until, I think, early May, to go in and modify your application. I saw their tentative regulations, and I would strongly suggest every reader go and look at those.
Really?
Because there's some big changes.
Affecting
I don't want to tell what all those.
Well, why not?
Yes.
Now you've got.
Well, I don't want to tell everybody, because then they'll look at it, and if I tell them exactly what changes I think are important, then it's not going to be to my benefit. I'll tell them about it next year once the draw is done.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, right now Wyoming's having their public. Every year they have their public meetings. They're having those, and then their commission's going to meet. I think late April or early May, and then they finalize everything. So some of the proposed changes may not make it, but interesting to see how they're trying to address some of the things. They're trying to address overcrowding in archery seasons. They're trying to address chronic wasting disease prevalence in some herds, not too many of them. They're trying to address too many cow elk in some units. So the amount of changing cow tags, if you go there hunting cow elk, or the expansion of seasons where it used to be bull only, that's going to be pretty much any elk. So you could use your bull tag on a cow. Just stuff like that. That I'm one of those nerds, Corey, that I watch the meetings for as many states as I can when they adopt the final regulations.
Well, a lot of times watching those meetings, the conversation is a little easier to follow than what you end up with in the draft regulations anyway. So that's there's a benefit.
And usually what the commissioners focus on are anything that's changing. And they want justification for why something is changing before they vote. And usually you have a good biologist there that has their data, and it's always helpful for me. So I know some people are like, I got work to do. I get it. I'm bored. But
I was just looking through it here, and there's definitely some changes. That's
yeah, there definitely are. A few units have increase in tags. Few units have decreases in tags. But some new season structures.
I was going to say some different season dates.
Yeah. Some states, like Montana, it's like the same unit, same quota, same everything every year.
Yeah.
And it's like, why don't we just recycle the document from last year and save the printing costs?
Yeah.
Whereas states like Nevada, Wyoming, Arizona, even Utah, they're pretty adaptive to changing things every year. New Mexico, a little bit more of that's what we've always done and is what we're always going to do kind of thing. And maybe Utah doesn't, or maybe New Mexico doesn't have a lot of fluctuations. So maybe they feel comfortable doing that. But,
well, and I think a place like New Mexico and Arizona, even Utah, they're pretty dialed in. They're pretty restrictive on how many tags they give out, especially in the higher demand areas. And so you do have that ability to keep things the same and not worry about it getting worse, and then maybe every 10 years when you realize, oh, wow, we've got a overpopulation problem, then you can do something special to add some more tags. But you get into a place like Colorado or Montana or Idaho or even Wyoming where So there's a lot of over-the-counter, especially for residents, a lot of opportunity for hunting. And I think you do have to kind of stay on top of it to a degree to keep things managed where they need to be and ride that fine line between, opportunity and keeping the populations up and the quality up.
Yeah. I went and volunteered to be the MC of the Reno Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation banquet a couple of weeks ago. And in doing that, I always sit down and read my history of elk in their state. And having went to college there, I had a kind of a starting point of, well, I remember when I went to college here and when I stayed there and worked for 3 years thereafter. When I left, they had, I think, 700 to 800 elk in Nevada.
Wow.
And that was in 1991. They had a statewide management objective of about 3,000. There were only three mountain ranges that were supposed to have elk. And now they have 12 to 14,000 elk scattered across multiple mountain ranges. They harvest more bull elk today than what the entire state population was when I was living there.
Wow.
And they're getting ready to. So in 1997, what kind of was the big triggering mechanism was in 1997, they rewrote their statewide elk plan. And what had happened is in the interim, the Elk Foundation and some of its partners and the Nevada Department of Wildlife went in and bought a ranch up in Elko County that they immediately turned over to part of it to the state, part to the BLM, I think. But the grazing allotments and a lot of the water got distributed to public land grazers. And all of a sudden, that instead of Elko County being off limits to elk, part of the deal was we're going to give you all these extra AUMs that were attached to this ranch that we bought. But in exchange, we're going to get to introduce elk here. So I think when that was going on, the Elk Foundation paid for a couple of years. They paid to have elk shipped to Elko County up in, the Jubridge, Bruneau River, all that stuff. And now there's a gob of elk there.
That's cool.
And so this agency sits down, the Nevada Department of Wildlife, and says, we have the habitat. We got to figure out ways to build the advocacy and the tolerance for elk. And so they've been very, very committed to the promise they made to ag producers. We are not going to let the numbers get over whatever it was, I think 15,000. So they fluctuate around 12,000 elk, but they have more habitat, more capacity for more elk.
Yeah.
Well, if we have any Nevada listeners this summer, I think later this summer and this fall, that elk management plan that they're operating from, I think is going to be out for comment and review. And if hunters weigh in and hunters find ways to support an expanded elk population geographically and in terms of numbers, that's good. And I don't know what it'll take. In Nevada, a big issue there is public land grazing, the impacts wild feral horses have had on those public land grazers. And so the cushion of what the public land grazers have to share their range allotments with elk is way less than it used to be because there's 4 or 5 times as many horses as there used to be. And so that stupid horse issue keeps impacting everything we want to do.
Oh, I was hoping we'd be able to avoid talking about horses. I could see you in the video, your face, you changed. Expression changed. When you said wild feral horses, there was some passion behind that. And then you couldn't refrain from saying stupid horses. So they are impactful in the state of Nevada.
Yeah. So my point of all that is, if you live in Nevada, be weighing in on that plan when it comes out for comment and review, and know that your agency has some challenges that might not be present in a state like, say, Montana, where 2/3 of our state is private and we don't have a bunch of range maggots running around like that. Did I say that? Sorry. Yeah, whatever. But more elk in Nevada for residents means more elk for non-residents, right? There's 10%, whatever you want to call it, non-resident carve out or quota. Yep. So back to what we always say, more elk on the landscape solves an awful lot of problems. Yep. And I don't know if that'll be possible in Nevada, hopefully, but I know what the answer will be if no hunters show up or no hunters comment on that plan.
Yep.
It'll be probably less elk in Nevada. So,
yep.
Anyhow.
Yep. Show up.
Yeah. Show up and speak up.
Yep.
So, but this is my year. I know I'm drawing Nevada with whatever I got, 5 points or something.
I just applied again for one of those fence sitters, just accumulating points. Just where I'm using my points in Wyoming and Montana, so I can't just spend them all at once. But
why?
Why? There's only so many days in September.
Oh, there's October, there's November.
The elk don't bugle as much then, so I'm not wasting points to go hunt elk that aren't bugling.
I got you. Yeah. All right.
If I want to do that, if I want to do that, I'd go hunt a mule deer.
Okay. We got some people who asked what Corey's doing with his mule deer points in Colorado. Did you apply or did you just buy another point?
I applied. Ooh. And it'll be interesting to see what the points do this year. If they creep up like people are predicting they will. Because if they creep up more than a point, then I won't draw. But if they hold the same or just go up a point, I'll be okay. So,
I bought a point for elk in Colorado.
I did too.
I'm convinced I'm drawing Nevada, Utah, and New Mexico. So
there we see. And I was just excited. I was going to draw Montana and Wyoming and be able to hunt Idaho. Here you are swinging for the fence.
Oh yeah. Yeah, guys. Where did I meet this guy? I was talking to some guy recently. He drew New Mexico 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, you know the governor or something, or what's the deal? And then I talked to the U.S. Senator from New Mexico. Yeah, he'd drawn one tag in like 6 or 7 years. I'm like, man, I thought if you're a U.S. Senator, you just like roll it out for you. He just laughed. He's like, if it came to the what do you say? Something about if it came down to tags being awarded based on how much political favor you have back home, he said, I'd never draw a tag. There's something like that. It was kind of funny the way he said it. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I won't draw New Mexico, but I'm pretty sure this is the year for Utah and Nevada.
There you go. Hey, optimism is, you ought to get some bonus points just for the optimism.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I was checking on back there was endangered species stuff when I was back there.
And you came back with grizzly bear tags in your pocket, right?
I came back saying to myself, I probably ought to allocate my time on something that's going to produce more results. The way the U.S. Senate works is there's this thing called cloture that anyone want a history lesson. The Senate's always been considered this deliberating body. They debate and they argue and they get up there. And I mean, the other night, some guy argued for 25 hours in the Senate. Well, in the House, they don't have that. The speaker can just say, we're having a vote, sit down and shut up. They don't do that, but they could if they wanted to. Well, in the House or in the Senate, it requires 60 senators to vote and agree that we are done with debate, and then a bill can move to have a vote. So in the U.S. Senate, you're kind of having to get 60 votes. If you don't have 60 votes, they can kill whatever you want. So anything related to endangered species stuff does not have 60 votes in the U.S. Senate. So, yeah.
So it's just not even getting discussed.
No. It might get debated, but they're not going to get the 60 votes necessary to take a bill from the debate world and move it over to actual vote. Because once the debate has been, all right, 60 of us say we're done debating, then when it goes to a vote, it only requires 51 of the 100 senators. So some people are going to say, well, Randy, that makes no sense. How did the wolf delisting, because I got Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, a couple other states, got congressional delisting through the U.S. Senate. How did you do that? Because the Democrats controlled the Senate at the time. Well, there's a rule, a little subset to that in the Senate that says if it's a budget bill, we don't need the 60 votes to stop debate. We're just going to once everyone's done bloviating, we're going to go to a 51-49 or whatever. 51 votes will carry the day if it's a budget thing. So in 2011, the Democrats wanted to make sure that the government didn't shut down. So a Democratic senator from Montana and a Republican Congressman Simpson from Idaho, they got together and they attached a rider to a budget bill that congressionally delisted wolves. So that was kind of the using procedure and process to get around that 60 vote limit. That's the first time it's ever happened.
Are you saying
likely
those
the last
two,
time.
two, the senator and congressman, allowed for wolves to be delisted?
Correct.
Huh.
Yeah, they got an amendment attached.
Yeah, they weren't responsible for getting wolves to the states.
No.
How'd that
Did
happen?
I say?
No,
did
you didn't. You were clear on that. I just,
how did we end up with wolves getting introduced in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming?
Yeah,
that was in 1995. Word came down from the White House that, hey, I promised a bunch of people we're going to reintroduce wolves. And so that's what he did. He told the U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
There was no vote needed, no debate needed. It was executive order.
Yep, pretty much.
It's interesting to hear, I mean, there's still people, what are we, 40 years, literally, 30 years later at this point.
Yep.
There are still people blaming the Idaho Fish and Game for being responsible for bringing the wolves to Idaho. And you just have to understand a little bit deeper. Their hands were tied. They were told, we're dropping wolves off and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
So us getting them delisted allowed us at least to be able to manage them. And that, when the states got management rights to it, then that allowed them to be responsible for them. But up until that point, they had no say in where, when, how many, any of that. There was no responsibility on the states for bringing those in.
Right. So those of us who saw that we were getting wolves, whether we wanted them or not, it required some strategy. Okay. Wolves, at least in Montana, were starting to work their way back in northwest Montana. We know that probably 20 years from now, wolves will have dispersed quite a ways. So even though today in 1995, they aren't in a lot of places in Montana, they're going to be here 2020. By today, we probably would have had wolves throughout most of the state. So how do we negotiate the best thing we possibly can? Because to whatever credit someone is willing to give in that process, President Clinton did tell Secretary of Interior Babbitt, send your people out there and have meetings with the states and get as much input as you can. Even though, how much input do you have when word is out that the wolves are coming? We already got Canadian trappers lined up to catch them and we'll bring them down. But here's one of the things that was really important in that negotiation. And it gets to the point of, if you have a strategy, you get as much out of something as you can when you have to negotiate. So rather than wolves just being brought here and considered an endangered species like they are in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, we said, if you're going to bring these wolves, the reintroduction is going to happen under what's called Section 10J of the Endangered Species Act. Section 10J says that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is allowed to bring and reintroduce a population of a species as experimental and non-essential. So if you end up being under Section 10J, it opens up a wide array of possibilities for state management and establishes thresholds for state management. So when we were doing those negotiations, if you want to call it that, when you know they could push you off the cliff at any time and just say too bad.
Let them feel like they're getting their say in this, and we'll call it a negotiation.
Yeah, so those people who want to criticize Idaho Game and Fish, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, Wyoming Game and Fish, hunters and those agencies, we were all in on meetings and we said, hey, let's at least get it under Section 10J because we can get delisting because it's non-essential and it's experimental, and we wouldn't be tied to the fate of the place where wolves never were removed, like northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. Those wolves over there are not 10J wolves under the Endangered Species Act. Those are full-on ESA wolves back in the Midwest. So your agencies, these three agencies, went and put up as good of a fight as they could. And if they hadn't, we would not be hunting, trapping, or otherwise managing wolves right now in those three states. So they can complain about your agency and say they're the ones who brought the wolves here. No, they aren't.
And they didn't have the ability. And I think that's what, you bring up that argument. Well, they weren't responsible for that. And they said, well, they didn't do anything to stop it. And that's not anything as a state you can do when the president does an executive order and says, we're going to do this.
Right. That would be like me saying, I'm going to go over to the White House today and I'm going to tell the president, elk tags for everybody. I want an executive order. Elk tags for everyone. The people laugh like, Randy, that's stupid. That would never happen. Well, that's about the same chance that the states had of derailing wolf delisting or wolf reintroduction in 1995. Yep. We knew we were getting them. So how do we get the best deal possible? And that's where we ended up.
And that's what I've always said is, would I prefer not to have wolves? Yeah, because of the effect they have on things I enjoy. Yeah. But they're here, and there's nothing we can debate the past all we want. They're here. Now all we can do is do our part to manage them because they have to be managed. And they're smart animals.
Back to your question of how could a Republican Idaho congressman and a Democratic Montana senator give us congressional delisting of wolves in the West? Well, they could because it was under this subchapter of the Endangered Species Act.
And that's the 10J.
Yeah. Whereas it's way harder to have there's never been congressional delisting of any other species that is not covered under 10J. So we call it Maine ESA, or you're under the regular ESA rules. There's never been a congressional delisting of a species under the Maine ESA.
Wow.
Only under this little subchapter of 10J. And that's what we spent all of our energy trying to get negotiated with the feds in 1995. So,
very cool.
Little history lesson.
That's right. Yeah. So it's not the state agency. It's funny because Idaho, I think it was just today, Idaho came out with their big game rules. I think they do it every 2 years. So for 2025, 2026 came out. And the comments on social media are just so backwards. Like and if you're going to make a comment and you don't like the Fish and Game age, that's fine, but at least have a valid reason. Don't say, because non-resident tags increase every year. No, they don't. They were held the same and they actually decreased a few years ago. That's the Fish and Game is not to blame for that. That's because it's not real. It's not happening. Yeah. And, some people are complaining, well, the Fish and Game treats non-residents better in Idaho than residents because they allow non-residents to get their tags in December, and residents don't find out the draws until July. So they're giving preferential treatment to non-residents. And I'm thinking, oh, hold on. For the over-the-counter tags at residents, we can get those on, the first day of the year, whenever. We can plan our vacation time around that. The draws are the same for non-residents and residents, so they find out at the same time. So it's just, if you're going to be upset at the agency, first off, make sure that it's legit. And I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not here to defend them, but this goes back to our discussion on emotion and passion. If you need somebody to blame for something, at least make sure that they can be blamed. They're even a part of the problem that's going on, because you look really silly and you lose credibility immediately, and you look like you're somebody who isn't successful as a hunter, and you're just trying to find somebody to blame for that. And that doesn't go very far to affect change. So if there really needs to be change, if there's change that needs to happen, let's figure it out.
Yeah. I wish I could say that hunters were any different than the rest of society, where we really thought through our comments and we made sure our facts were straight and stuff. But being a cross section of our bigger society, we're going to have some members in our community that do the same thing. And, I tell them, hey, you may as well, if you want to do that, you should just go blame your neighbor for the war in Ukraine. They look at me like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, that's about as logical as your argument is. It's like, okay, whatever. So, but let's, this whole ESA thing does affect elk and elk habitat for a lot of reasons. Not just the listing or delisting of species, but the Endangered Species Act is used as a mechanism for groups to prevent productive land management from happening out on the landscape. That's what they litigate under, is the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah.
And they use a thing called the Equal Access to Justice Act to make a profit doing that. So those are the issues that we got to figure out a strategic way to start solving. The symptom is we have vast amounts of federal land that, through litigation, isn't getting managed in the best way for wildlife. And it keeps me on task of, whenever I meet with a congressperson or a senator, I say my audience wants two things. They want productive public lands, and they want access to those lands. They don't want to sell them. They don't want to give them to the states. They want Congress to do its job and figure out a way to manage those lands better. Better for wildlife. Yep. Better for communities, better for economies, better, better is in a lot of, has a lot of different aspects to it. And that's why when I go back there, I always try to gauge the temperature about what the likelihood is of any tweaks or whatever of the ESA or some of these other things that muck up land management. And right now, those things are about as low down the list as elk hunting.
Yeah.
But
for them, if they were on the list as high as elk hunting is for us, they'd be getting immediate attention.
Right.
But.
Yeah, and the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation is weighing in on all this stuff. When I go and meet with people in Congress, a lot of them forget that I'm no longer on the board of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. I haven't been for 6 years now. But this is one thing that's always cool. They're like, well, what could I do for the Elk Foundation? I'm like, well, I'm not here representing the Elk Foundation anymore. But what it reminds me is the professional, kind of silent, behind the scenes manner that the Elk Foundation communicates with these people on policy issues is effective. And I know some people will be like, well, why aren't they out there screaming and yelling? Well, if they were effective, this wouldn't happen and that wouldn't happen and this person would have got unelected. No, if you got a longer term strategy, that's just not how you play the game. And so on multiple occasions, the Elk Foundation was brought up as being someone whose opinion about public land management carries a lot of weight. And that always puts a smile on my face because I know that they represent me and our audience the way we hunt, right?
Yeah.
Public land elk hunters, all elk hunters for that matter, public or private. But they realize, if you ask the Elk Foundation people, they'll say, well, we have an issue of a lot of elk becoming less accessible because the better habitat is on private land. And that creates conflict. Our members want access to elk. Well, we're not going to go and force our way onto private land in this country. That's what the Fifth Amendment says. These are private property rights. If we want to have hunters and RMEF members have access to elk, we need better habitat so that the elk will be more inclined to stay on the public land. Yep. And that's why, Elk Foundation is nearing 10 million acres, or getting close to the 10 million mark of habitat improvement. Why? Because you can't solve everything by just creating more access to more public land.
And you can't
that's
solve
helpful.
everything by creating more elk either. Like that's,
right.
They all go hand in hand.
Right. And so the access is a huge priority of RMEF. But they have to look at it and say, if we have access to all this public land, but the public land doesn't hold any elk, what are we doing for our members and for the cause of elk hunting? And that's why RMEF is always engaged in these Forest Service issues and BLM issues, trying to get better habitat management for elk and other wildlife. And, whether we want to admit it or not, habitat and hunting pressure is part of what has created these dynamics of so many elk living on private land. If I'm an elk and I look over on that private land and it's not a big weed pit, and it's been managed
irrigated and tilled and
or whatever, there's not knapweed, thistle and everywhere. If I'm an elk, I'm going over there.
Yep.
I don't know how you say that any differently. Elk are smart. If they were dumb, we would have killed them all by now.
No, I saw it with Randy when we hunted in New Mexico. We had a choice of going to Sonic to get ice cream or going to Dairy Queen. You couldn't convince Randy that there was even ice cream at Sonic when you have a Dairy Queen there. So I learned a very valuable lesson there, that there is a difference in ice cream, and Dairy Queen wins that battle against Sonic. So.
Yeah, and if you have a mammal with a very large brain, they're going to select for the better habitat, whether it's the better ice cream or the better food, forage, and shelter. So, I know a lot of times that doesn't show up, right? It doesn't show up as a trailhead of, hey, this access provided by whatever. But you either get access to the elk or you get elk on the lands that you have access to. Those are really, I don't know what a third option would be to help elk hunters have more elk to hunt.
Yeah. Well, we could bring in truckloads of elk and dump them on public land. And if there's better feed on the private land, they're going to go right there. And then the private landowner is going to complain that their property is getting overrun with elk, and something needs to be done, and depredation tags are given, and they get to go and kill a bunch of elk on their private land. And we're right back to where we started, with no benefit to the public land elk hunter. So it's, there's a threefold there. Yeah, the populations are important, and growing the populations, putting more elk on the mountain is an important part of that. But putting more elk on the mountain without good habitat and without access to public lands with good habitat, all three of those have to go hand in hand. And when all three of those go hand in hand, it's a pretty beautiful thing.
Yeah. And if anyone ever sees kind of the diagrams of how the Elk Foundation looks at it, you pretty well summarize that, Corey, that we got to have all of this. If we don't have all of this, we're going to have incomplete situations, and our members aren't going to have the opportunities that we want them to have. So,
and just the foresight that they had to see that coming before it was an issue, before public land access was an issue, before habitat was an issue. The Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation was working on those things before it was an issue. And now that it's an issue, had they not been working on it for the last 30 years or longer,
right,
we wouldn't have the foothold we have, and we wouldn't have the leverage we have to be able to make the changes that are necessary, that they are making, and the improvements that they're able to see through. That's the value of an organization like the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, is they are seeing ahead, and they're seeing the issues that we're going to face, and they're tackling them before they become issues.
Yeah, and policymakers, or even the agencies who are told by policymakers what to do, they all, when it comes to these issues, the Elk Foundation's opinion is solicited. And so that, even if you feel, well, I could email my congressperson or senator, they're never going to listen to me, or I can show up at a public hearing with 500 people, they're never going to listen to me. One of the other ways to get your voice heard is through the Elk Foundation, and they do a good job of it.
Yeah.
But what else we got on that, Corey? I'm trying to connect an awful complicated web here.
No, this is good stuff. Like, you've been in Washington, D.C., so I think we need to talk policy and that.
Yeah.
Application season's winding down, which means we're going to have to start talking about
e-scouting and planning and
tactics and
making me getting back in shape.
Getting back in shape? Why'd you get out of shape?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm out of shape, but when you do it at a hotel, when your workout's at a hotel room, I don't care. Other than Red Rocks and the Durango in Vegas and the Pepper Mill in Reno, those are the only 3 hotels that really have a gym worth a dang. So a lot of them, I just have to do full, what they call it, body weight workouts.
Yeah.
You don't use weights, you don't use machines or anything, and that helps. But when I'm back in town, either at my house or over at Mountain Tough, I can get back doing it the way I should be doing it.
Well, I'm coming to visit you in a week and a half, and we're going to sit down with Dustin at Mountain Tough, and you're not going to make me go to their facility, are you?
No, Dustin said he wants to do it at my office.
Oh, perfect. Good.
Yeah. You could go over there and show him how it's done.
No, that's, I don't know what it is. I'm introverted naturally anyway, but working out in a group or something, I work out every day. Like, I love working out, but man, I'm insecure about working out with other people. So.
Wow. They have this little corner over there, and they call it their lab. It's like Randy's corner. It's like, we know he's over there because we can see his white legs, but we check in on him once in a while to see if we got to bring the defib.
I was just going to say they got oxygen and a defibrillator. That's why they call it Randy's corner.
Yeah, so I try to go over there over the lunch hour and just get in the corner, do my own thing. But they're right across the street from me, so it's really, really convenient. And they have, if some days I want to try work more on strength and less on condition or whatever, they have such an array of weights and bands and other stuff. It makes it easy for me. But I don't have to go over there to get a workout. I got most of the stuff at home, but if I go home to work out over lunch hour, my wife's such a good cook, I'll end up just eating homemade noodles and dumplings and the chicken and whatever.
Eating yourself right out of a workout. Yeah.
Yeah. So
we just bought a commercial stair stepper.
Yeah.
And Sam even mentioned, we were shed hunting last week, and Sam even said, I know I haven't used it a bunch, but I think it's made a big difference, and hiking in the mountains seems to be a lot better. So,
well, that's good. He's all of what, 18 or 19?
All of 18, yeah. So, if anybody's going to notice a difference, it's probably not him.
Right, be old fart like me.
Exactly. And I do notice a difference.
I went and worked out yesterday, and so I'd driven over to Missoula all day, not all day, but most of Tuesday, and then sat in some meetings. Wednesday, sat in meetings over there most of the day, and then I drove home, got up really early, drove home for 3 hours. Getting out of a car, I was so stiff. I asked them, I'm like, what's the physiology behind why you get so stiff sitting all the time? And they politely said, well, some of it has to do with age. And they didn't want to say, well, because you're an old fart. So Sarah and Nick were pretty polite about it, but they got to talking. Nick said, you need to give yourself a treat every day. Or every 2 hours, he said. I'm like, oh, now you're talking my style. Chocolate chip cookies.
I was just going to say your eyes lit up and you thought Blizzard.
Yeah. He's like, no, we call them workout treats, like squats. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, every 2 hours, just get up and do 10 or 15 squats. Get some blood flowing. And then you won't get this achy, painy stiffness stuff. Your cells are losing fluid, and so you're feeling friction. And okay, yeah, this is an accountant explaining something to an audience from a guy who actually knows what he's talking about. But he said, stay hydrated and keep blood flowing at least every 2 hours. And so that's my goal now. Even if I'm here at the office every 2 hours, I'm going to do 20 push-ups or I'm going to do 20 squats and call it good. So, but yeah, we'll have e-scouting, we'll have workout, we'll have all kinds of cool stuff.
We do. Yep.
Now, even before hunting season.
I was going to say, hopefully policy season's coming to an end. Application season deadlines are coming to an end. Now we can start tackling some of the fun topics.
Yeah, I don't think I got any remaining gas left for policy season. I think I'm checking out on policy season. I'm home for the next month.
Wow.
And yeah.
Does your wife know that?
Okay. Yeah, she does. And she said,
okay
well, my mom... No. Well, she's okay with it. But she said, well, at the end of the month, I got to go to Oregon to help my mom. I'm like, okay. I'm like a bee she's trying to run away from or something, I think. When I'm gone, she calms down, and when I come back, she's swatting, trying to get rid of me. But no, I'm looking forward to just getting back in a normal routine of not, different hotel.
Yeah.
Much as Kim went to Washington, D.C. with me, and the first thing she did is like, give me your grocery list. And so when I was up doing meetings, she went over to the only grocery store within walking distance was a Whole Foods, and we got one here in Bozeman. But man, I went into that joint. There's some different looking folk there. I don't know that it's quite my style, and it's really expensive.
Yeah,
I'm like, why is it so expensive at Whole Foods? Is there something they do different? They like gold plated bags or something? I couldn't believe what it costs at Whole Foods.
I think just people are willing to pay more.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, genius of branding, I guess.
That's right.
Anyhow, it was this is one of the things about my travel now is I try to not eat restaurant food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I try to have good snacks and fruit and things that I don't get. You know how it is if you fall off the good eating wagon, you get home after a 4 or 5 day trip and you just feel like your body's polluted.
Yep.
And so I'm thankful that Kim walked down the streets of Washington, D.C. to Whole Foods and came back with a grocery bag or two full of good foods and kept me from falling off the wagon while I was back there that week. But, yeah. And that's part of it for me. Now the other thing is, now that I'm home, I can get back to grilling every night. And so when you ask how I'm out of shape, I don't know that I'm out of shape. I'm out of my routine.
Yeah.
And I like being in that routine, and I get way more energy. I get a lot more done. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Well, welcome home.
Yeah. And when I get this elk tag that's going to be in my pocket here after Nevada and Utah draw, I'll be all excited.
We haven't even got to the deadlines yet. You're already anticipating.
Oh, I got mine in.
When's New Mexico announce?
Next week. Same.
Yeah.
Usually they announce within a day of Montana. I think Montana will announce by the 15th, and I think New Mexico the 16th of April.
Man, I'm going to be able to start planning my September here pretty soon.
Yeah, well, when you draw, you get a hold of me. I'll bring those beans and weenies. And, you go elk hunting. I'll go shoot some grouse for dinner.
I'll let you do that.
You let me do that?
I want more than grouse teeth, though. I've done that diet.
Are you letting the world in on what the next destination elk plan is?
Well, we've got to wait till we draw tags, but it's going to be much more of a traditional destination elk season. I've got some really cool stuff planned, and once the tags are in hand, we can talk about that a little bit. But yeah. It's going to be very much like what we started with, just a lot of hunting, a lot of, obviously everything's public land, but a lot of just general tags, general tag in Wyoming, general tag in Montana, over-the-counter tag in Idaho, just kind of the bread and butter of what we do.
Yeah, well, I got big aspirations, but I'll probably end up with a general tag in Montana, and that'll be it.
Wow. I thought, hold on. What just came and sucked all of the optimism out of you? You were going to draw New Mexico and Nevada and Utah, and now I can buy a tag in Montana. That's probably all I'll end up with.
Well, you were starting to be such a realist. I'm like, well, I better pull my optimism rug out from underneath me here. But okay. All right. So the audience, if I start hooping and yelling in May when the Nevada-Utah results come out, because they come out the same week, and I draw both those, you guys are going to think I got the keys to the castle or something. If I had the keys to the castle, I would have drawn more elk tags in those states than I have. So,
yep.
But anything else we got to do on this great Friday, Corey, or have we covered pretty much everything worth covering?
I think we've covered a good deal. I am, remember the Elk Camp events we did last year?
Yeah.
We're going to do those again. Yeah. They were such a good time that we're going to do those again here in Idaho in late July into the first part of August.
So where does someone sign up for that operation?
Well, it's going to be, so we had, we limit it to 25 people for each camp. They're in person. It's all simulated elk hunting. So we have situations already predetermined. We have people who are pretending to be elk, and we go out and kind of simulate a hunt in a situation, multiple hunts in multiple situations, and incredible food, incredible experience, everything. But where it's limited to just 25 people at camp, it's hard to get in there. And out of the 50 people that attended last year, almost 40 of them have said they want to come back. Now, whether that'll align with, their vacation time and their finances and everything, I'm sure it won't be that many. And I told them, we're going to do the same thing. Like, I'm not creating new curriculums every year here.
Yeah.
And they said, just the experience and the people that were there, we want to come back. So we're going to give them first shot. And then we have a priority registration list of people that have emailed since last year that said, hey, I couldn't make it, but I want to go for sure to the next one. And those people will get next crack at registering. So anybody who is interested and wants to at least look at the dates and be on the priority list, they can just email us. You can do it through the Elk Talk podcast or through Elk 101, but just email and say, I want to be on the priority registration list for the Elk Camp events this year. And then we'll be sending out emails with instructions for how that happens. And I don't think that we'll have any spots left for the general public. I think that just through those who attended previously and the priority registration list will probably sell out. So if you're serious about it, you don't have to commit to going, but at least get on the email list so that you can find out more details. But it was so incredible last year. I mean, we're in elk country, we're camped out, we get to spend 3 straight days with people and just talk about anything related to elk hunting. We have an archery range there, so in the evenings they can shoot bows and pick our brains, and then during the day it's 12-14 hours straight of just elk hunting immersion.
That sounds like a deal.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sorry I didn't get on the list. Sounds like I'm...
You're always invited. In fact, Bryce and Jeff from Peaks were there last year. They came and just hung out, and Peaks provides teepees for people to stay in if they want to stay in a teepee and check them out, or they can bring their own campwear, but they're there, and the food was incredible. We had a guy with, I forget, 1,000 or a 1,500 gallon barbecue pit. And that thing, it ran for 6 straight days. We had barbecue meat every meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner. I mean, we're talking ribs and steak and chicken and just, it was incredible.
Wow. Man, I just need to show up for the food, it sounds like.
Isaac he did last year. He was working construction, and he just would show up every night right about dinner time for some reason.
Well, maybe I'll buy an ice cream truck and I'll set up right next to the barbecue wagon there.
If it was like last year, we could use an ice cream truck. It was plenty warm during the day.
Yeah. Well, Corey, I guess we better let people go before I start telling more Forrest Gump stories.
You've always got a relatable story to whatever we're talking about, so it's entertaining.
Yeah. Well, if it is worth anything, the amount of comments we get in person, like a couple of people I ran into back there. I ran into a guy in the Minneapolis airport on the flight, on the layover. He's like, "Hey, I love that Elk Talk podcast. Keep on with all those funny stories you guys tell. That's worth more than the elk advice." I'm like, well, I'm glad you found them funny and not offensive. Because,
how long ago did we start this? Were we in 8 years now? Something?
2000, summer of 2018.
So, we're 7 years.
7 years, yeah.
And I remember the very first podcast we did, we met up in Missoula, and we were in the little room, little podcast room there. And we said something, you mentioned something about, we'll talk, everything will be elk hunting related and, some rabbit holes. And I made a comment about, if it's conversation with Randy, there's sure to be rabbit holes. And I think every podcast we've done in the last 7 years, we've gone down rabbit holes. And sometimes you worry a little bit about, are we staying on topic? We don't really have a topic, but that's the comment I get most in person is keep up the rabbit. I love the rabbit holes. They're just distracting and entertaining enough that we can't wait to hear what Randy says next. So,
yeah. Well, my wife, last night we go to dinner with a couple, and he listens to this podcast, so he's going to rat me out here. And Kim doesn't. Well, he's telling her last night at dinner, well, Randy said on the podcast. And I'm just like, oh, man, this is going to be a long ride home, and it's only 4 miles.
Yeah.
So I'm probably going to have to either swear all the listeners to secrecy that you can't tell my wife some of the stuff I let out here, or I'm just going to have to fess up to her and say, honey, I don't know what to tell you. Take it out on me right now, but I'm going to keep telling stories.
That's the only reason
about elk hunting.
It's the only reason you can give marital advice is because your wife doesn't listen.
Are you saying Jennifer listens?
She listens, yeah, and she'd call me out on it. That's good advice. Too bad you don't do any of that, but yeah. So, I can't be a hypocrite and say I do things or suggest things or give advice if I don't do it myself, and she will. She knows if I do it or not.
Dang, I wish I could remember what Kim told me the other day. She's like, you can go tell that on your podcast. She put me in my place. She like straightened me out, and she's like, gonna put that on your podcast.
That's
I just
funny.
kind of walked outside and started picking dandelions or something. I know when to keep my mouth shut. Or as they say, when you're digging a hole, put the shovel down. So, yeah. But all right, Corey, you have a great weekend, and look forward to getting a text message from you next week when Montana gives you an elk tag.
That's right. I'll be there in person the week after, and look forward to sitting down with you in person and doing a couple of these.
Yeah, that'll be good.
Awesome.
All right. Take care.
Yep.
Thanks, folks.